Ghana secured the 70th position out of 180 countries in the Corruption Perceptions Index CPI 2023 with a score of 43 out of 100. The country's anti-corruption efforts have stagnated for the fourth consecutive year, according to the CPI. Special Prosecutor Kissie Jabing expressed disappointment over the lack of commitment in implementing effective measures to combat corruption.
We are standing at a single spot and spinning around slowly on one foot in a circle. We certainly know the cure to the malaise, but we are unwilling to take the medication fully.
Kissie Jabing advocated for the judiciary's independence, increased powers and mandate for anti-corruption institutions and the provision of sufficient resources.
May we write anti-corruption law enforcement institutions into the Constitution, especially the flagship office of the Special Prosecutor. May we enlarge the powers and mandate of anti-corruption law enforcement institutions. May we assure anti-corruption law enforcement institutions the flow of adequate resources. May we assure, in actual practice, the independence of the judiciary. May we set up a specialized anti-corruption court manned by especially trained judges in the field to swiftly and efficiently deal with corruption cases.
Chief of Staff Akosia Fremal Sayopare urged civil society organizations to trust anti-graft bodies and avoid suspicions once bodies have exonerated individuals under investigation for misconduct.
Unfounded allegations of corruption and perception of wrongdoing hardly aid the fight against corruption. When corruption allegations have been investigated and findings made, exonerated the subject of investigations, there is no basis for continued suspicion of wrongdoing by civil society.
The General Secretary of the NDC, Fifi Kwete, in an interview attributed the country's lack of progress to the Akufo-Addo-led NPP government.
Effectively, as we see, we have leadership that has become virtual clearing agents. And when the president continues to do that, the people working under him will not have any fear.
According to the Ghana Integrity Initiative, the country's stagnated score highlights a global trend of deteriorating justice systems, which is reducing accountability of public officials.
All right, so let's take you through what Ghana's performance has been since 2018 in our fight against corruption. So it clearly states that we scored 41 as a country in 2018 out of 100. In 2019, we retained the 41% out of 100. In 2020, 43. 2021, 43. 2022, 43. And then 2023, we have retained the same position, which means that we have neither gone forward or backwards, where our perception corruption remains at 43%. On recommendations that have been made to help fight corruption, it says the executive should urgently take steps to lay the conduct of public officers bill before Parliament for it to be quickly looked at. Also, the executive and the legislature must take steps to bridge legal gaps for the perception of, for the prosecution of selected corruption cases outside the current legal framework. The government must give justice systems resources and transparency needed to effectively punish all corruption offenses and reform laws on defamation to allow journalists to report on issues of corruption. So those are some of the recommendations. And finally, the Judicial Service should institute limited immunity for judges in judicial duties while excluding immunity in corruption or criminal cases. Right, so those have been the thoughts, at today's release of the Corruption Perception Index report. And it looks as though Ghana hasn't done too well. In successive years, we seem to have retained where we were in terms of how corruption has been in the last few years. Let's speak to Edem Senanu now. He is one of the corruption anti-crusaders and also the executive co-chair for the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. Mr. Senanu, good evening. Thank you for your time.
Good evening, sir.
Many have said that the fact that it is a perception doesn't necessarily mean it is a reality. However, if we as a nation believe there is a concern of corruption, Why do we keep saying it is only a perception and not institute measures to deal with it?
I think that it's a technical term that people don't understand, has a scientific basis for the correlation that is done to draw the conclusions. So, and this is data driven. The larger the pool of people you ask questions, the subjectivity of the response is reduced, and then you have a more objective opinion on the subject matter. So I think that is a technical term. Perhaps somebody should have the courage to change it from perception to corruption, regression, analysis or something. And then we'll recognize that this is not just a perception. It actually reflects what is going on. But much more critically, your question about why aren't we doing much more to deal with it? I think that, look, I mean, if you take when the NPP was coming back into power in 2015, 2016, I believe, the amount of talk about corruption and dealing with it set a very high pedestal for all of us. We had great expectations which have not been met. And I think essentially it's because the robustness with which our leadership has demonstrated the political will to take a position on all matters, irrespective of whether the people are close to you or not, and say, you step aside, let the investigations be done, wait till the investigation is done, let that investigative body have its full space to do what they want to do, come out with the results, engage with the public and media, and let the conclusions allow whoever is involved to face the full rigors of the law. We haven't done that. So we've not set the kind of precedents that serve as a deterrent for people to think that I cannot continue this way. In jurisdictions where the enforcement of the law and the speed with which these issues are tackled is clear that you can't get away with this, you will find that there is a significant reduction in the number of cases and the quantum of issues that are being dealt with. So we've not been robust enough in handling the issues of corruption.
Right. And Mr. Senanu, consistently, whichever government is in power, unfortunately, it's the NPP that's in power now, and per the results or the index that has been released, they seem not to have done well at all. We actually stagnated in the last 4 years. But governments over time have seemed to say that we are doing much. In fact, the chief of staff who was at the event spoke and said that government has done a lot in fighting corruption. But then again, there isn't much to see, to justify that position. If the government that has the mandate and the power to lead the fight against corruption says it is doing enough, what then is left for CSOs and, regular journalists probably to also contribute to that fight against corruption?
I think that the facts speak for themselves. So when people say that we've done a lot, we don't elect people into position to say, I've done a lot, but the problem is still there. None of us will do that. The leader is supposed to look at it and say, well, the issue hasn't gone. It means my strategies are not working. It means I have not done enough. And indeed, in other cultures, when it gets to a point where you think that you don't have any more new ideas, innovative, creative ways, you hand over the baton to somebody else who you think is potentially capable of doing so. So it is not sufficient for anyone to say we've done a lot. A lot is not what is translating into the change. Obviously, the lot has not translated into change. But we have other jurisdictions that are making progress. So what are they doing? How are we standing on the shoulders of giants who've achieved it? How are we leveraging other experiences? So I think that the facts speak for themselves. If anybody says that we've done a lot, clearly that a lot is not sufficient in the scheme of things. And you need to do a lot more, whether it's in terms of resourcing, whether it's in terms of taking a firm stand against these issues, whether it's in creating and supporting new laws, whether it is in terms of ensuring that you lead the way yourself. I mean, there are things that we ought to be doing much more comprehensively. There's not much public education being done about corruption. I don't know how much resources we are giving NCCE. Okay. But there's a lot of much of more work that could be done to reduce what is going on and to change the situation where we've stagnated for several years.
Adam, thank you so much for your time. As always, Adam Senanu, co-chair
And thank you
Citizens
for having me.
Movement Against Corruption.